being here. My name is Antonetta Minikilo, and I am the Planning Vision Project Manager for the City of Brampton. I'm pleased to introduce our two guests this evening. Here we have Rob Elliott, the City's Commissioner of Planning and Development Services, and internationally acclaimed urban visionary Larry Beasley. Together, they are leading the city in the creation of a vision for our future. We're very excited about this, and today also happens to be the launch of our engagement campaign, so we encourage everyone to visit brampton.ca/future-ready to share your ideas about Brampton's future. We're on a bit of a schedule tonight, so I'll quickly outline how this will work, how it's going to work, and warn you that I'll be very militant about time. You will each have an opportunity to ask 3 questions of Rob and Larry, and I understand that prior to this evening there was a draw, so the order in which the questions will be asked is Nikita from Bramptonist, Alan from In Brampton, and then Peter from the Brampton Guardian. We have allotted 3 minutes for each question and answer. Please note that we will be recording the conversation for future sharing purposes. And if everyone's ready, we can begin.
So I'm first up. Thanks for having me. So my first question is, there seems to be a bit of a disconnect with some of the planning things that we're doing and where we want to go. So for example, I know we have our first bike track plan, but it's going to be all the way out at Coover Meadows. So what are the plans to kind of align Brampton's, what we're currently doing, to where we want to go? Because I know we want to kind of shake that suburban mentality and that feel. So how do we get there if we're sort of, there's that disconnect between what we're building and what we want to get to?
Why don't I start, and then
Absolutely.
I'll turn it over to Rob. First, a vision isn't a plan. It isn't something you move right into doing tomorrow morning. It's to take a whole community and say, let's raise our heads, let's look beyond the existing laws, the existing status quo, the existing programs, and say, okay, if you take that long review, what's great for the city? What do you dream about that's good for the city? Once we pull it all together, working with thousands of people, and we get it down on paper, then we turn it over to him and we say, you need to change many, many things in order to make it work. And I will be recommending the kinds of institutional changes, program changes, style of doing business changes, and all of that I think are important for a city to be able to tackle the kind of vision and conclusions that we come to.
That makes sense.
Hi, Larry.
Hi,
So I understand you're the former planner for the city of Vancouver.
I am.
And Vancouver is a very, I think, unique municipality within the Canadian Confederation because it's by the ocean and just sort of landscape geography. It requires a lot of different sort of planning tools or planning policies that are involved. Is there anything that you think that you could take from the Vancouver model and is sort of you can adapt it to what we have here in Brampton?
First is, while I was the chief planner of Vancouver for many years and a planner in Vancouver for many years before that, I work everywhere in the world. I'm also the chief advisor on planning in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. I was the chief urban designer in Dallas, Texas for the last number of years. I've worked in Australia, up in the Nordic countries. I don't try to take something from one city and give it to another city, because that's the problem. That's why our cities are not very good, because we're homogenizing them. There are principles about cities that we're learning and that we're pretty sure work, and I test them all the time, and they seem to work, and I will be advising on those principles here. But what we really try to do, and what we're going to do in the session tonight, is you try to mine the mindset or the brain power of a local community itself, people who do 100% know this community. They know it inside out. They know it upside down. And put that together with those principles. So are principles coming from Vancouver? Yes, but they're coming from Abu Dhabi and Dallas and everywhere else in the world. How they'll manifest here, it will be unique to here. The one thing I will say, I don't want to get too long-winded, but I will say, is that many of the principles have been developed in an urban setting in our country, and right across the country you'll see those principles. But the big challenge of your generation, your age, that I can help a bit, is going to be to apply those in the suburban part of the country. 60% of Canadians prefer suburbs over core cities, 60%, and that's after all the work of my generation to entice people back to cities. And we have to ask ourselves, what is it they love about their suburban community? What is it they treasure and want to keep? And then what can we do to still evolve that community to be sustainable, to be livable, to be competitive, to be resilient, and to be all the things that modern cities have to be if we are, as a country, are going to survive and as a world are going to survive. So it's that combination of absolute uniqueness of this place and some principles and a bit of invention.
Just to elaborate on that, you were introduced to council during a committee meeting in May, and during that meeting you said that redefining the suburbs is a massive endeavor of the imagination.
Yes.
So you also said that turning Brampton into Toronto is not necessarily the answer.
In fact, I will say I know a little bit more now. It's definitely not the answer.
Right. So
Right.
can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. You have to start with the fact that we are a democracy. We're a free market economy. We're a place of high personal freedoms. We all love that in our country and in our culture. And so people are making choices all the time. The people who are making choices in downtown Toronto and the people who are making choices here are completely different. And it's not just a question of economics. It's not a question I can get a cheaper house here. No, it's a question of lifestyle. It's a question of the ambience you wish to be in. It's a question of the people you wish to associate with. It's your relationship with the environment, with your family. And our job, I think, is to understand that experience here and create the kind of setting in which that experience can be fully realized, but also in a responsible way, in an intelligent way, in a mutually supportive way with all the other people around us. When I started planning as a young fellow, I worked in communities that were falling apart. And I spent years putting those communities back together. Then I went and I worked in a downtown that was absolutely falling apart, as were downtowns all over the country. And we put that back together again by listening to people. Well, in all that time, suburbs were just continuing to happen, but we've not done this kind of inquiry at this level. So I'm here, I'm not telling you I have a magic bullet here, because I'm going to be asking my colleagues all over the country who are attempting to do the same thing, and my colleagues right here who every day are doing the same thing, to say, how do we invent this place to be great, to be livable, to be socially responsible, to be environmentally responsible. Those are the issues of the world, and I can tell you, everywhere in the world, you have to be making progress on those issues. But by the same token, you have to create something that free consumers in a free society, free voters in a free political system also want. So it's a combination that you have to achieve. It's different here than in downtown Toronto. And it's certainly different here than in downtown Vancouver.
Right. So if I can just break the rules slightly and just go to Rob and ask,
Sure.
You came from the region.
I did.
Now you're the planner at the city of Brampton. The biggest sort of obstacle that you're facing in that transition, in that role from a planning sense, any duplications, anything that kind of you weren't aware of before you got into the job?
No, I can't say there was any surprises, but I think that the rate of which people are willing to view things differently is different. We are getting some successes with different partners, stakeholders, about the way new urbanism is going to look. And some will get on board quicker than others, but I think everybody's got a view to a different way of building a city,
Right.
Which is fantastic. The one thing that was a bit of a surprise to me was actually the willingness of not only staff here but council here to take a lead. And I think when you look at their decision to invest in amenities around a university last week, that was a great example. So I was pleasantly surprised actually about the willingness to tackle things in a different perspective moving forward.
Okay, we'll go on to the next one.
Right back to me now. So one of Brampton's biggest challenges is sprawl, and from a visioning perspective, it's a challenge to make a city walkable and bikeable and all those things with so much sprawl. So I guess this is a two-part question. Is it one that can we work with the sprawl that's already taken place in Brampton, and if so, how? What's the plan to deal with that and to still grow the city in a more sustainable way?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I look at the city in a couple different perspectives. We've got, a very suburban traditional model that's aging in some places. We've got more of an urban feel like downtown here. And there's an opportunity with our greenfield as well to do things differently. So I think it's not a matter of putting in a policy and overnight we're going to change the lens that we apply planning principles to. But it's that, I'll call it a subtle alteration of the way that we allow for higher densities and things in our established neighborhoods. I think that's going to take some time, and that's exactly why we're reaching out to the public right now to hear from them, to understand what their views are. I think there's an opportunity in some of our aging suburbs to introduce more mixed use that didn't exist in the past. So it will be an evolution by all means, but I think that there's great opportunity ahead of us to do that.
I would say all over the world that sprawl is happening. And the art of it all over the world is to find places where you can cluster. And because you cluster, you get more urban energy, you get more human energy happening. By the same token, you've got to realize that part of the word sprawl actually means, in the mind of someone else, a comfortable neighborhood in which they lived in a quiet, positive way with their family. And so part of the vision that I'm already beginning to conjure up in my thinking from the people we've already talked to, and we'll be talking to more tonight, and we'll be talking to the council about this tomorrow, and we'll be talking to 30 or 40 more groups about this over the next few months. But a part of it is that there are lovely communities, and we want to make those the best communities they are, and there's greenfield areas, and maybe we can do those slightly differently. In both cases, we want to diversify, we want to provide more intensity, but not at a level that would be offensive to people who live in this part of the world. And then there's some places where we want to have a magic kind of energy for the city, a kind of energy that isn't here yet, but that when you go from 400,000 or 500,000 or 600,000 to 1 million, you begin to have. And either it disperses and is lost, or you find a way to cluster it, and when you cluster it, magic happens and things happen. People meet, people start to do things together, people discover a different way of living. That's what has to happen. So it's not so much that we will claw this whole place back into nature. That's never going to happen. We'll probably protect the nature that remains here, which you, by the way, are very lucky compared to most cities that I am working in, but we'll be shaping things as we go along.
Just a quick side question. I know you mentioned sort of bringing in some mixed use, and historically there's been some hesitancy towards that. So how will you approach that, and how do you deal with communities that are maybe more sort of reserved in that regard?
Well, there's different tactics for different areas of the city. I think in Greenfield, what we do is we plan for that right from the beginning days, so that's not a surprise to other people. I think that, Larry, you've got great examples from working in Vancouver where you actually, through working with the community, understand what their true concerns are. Sometimes you'll be faced with NIMBYism, but that's just a reaction to some form of change that people are uncomfortable with. So in diving into them and working with the community, understanding what the nature of their issues are, you can often find a resolution that's complementary.
Elsewhere where I work, we ask people some simple questions. We ask people, where do you want to live when you're older and you'd like to get out of this house? Is that near you, or are you going to have to go to another whole part of your region or elsewhere in the world? Where are your children going to live when they leave home and they would like to have their first place? Is that going to be near you? Can they afford to be near you? Or is that going to be some other place? We find that when we work with people looking at it from their angle, not from our angle as government and density and all that, but rather just saying what works for you. And we work with people in things like neighborhood audits, we call them, where they identify, well, here would be an interesting place for something to happen, and here you better not do it because this is such a treasured space for us. People start to find solutions that are organic to the way that they view the world and use the world, rather than something we're conning them into through our engagement. I think that kind of methodology is in the spirit of what the council is saying in terms of adopting recently an extraordinary outreach philosophy. I think it's in what the administration is saying by even bringing people like me in here. And I think it's what we will learn in the community, because as I started in the community, and we haven't done a lot yet, I'm already hearing that people want things to change a certain way.
Okay, so just to keep us on time, 2 of the last questions did go over, so we will be reducing that time from your final question. So we'll move on to Alan for your 3 minutes now.
So following that theme of this hesitancy towards change, I think transit, public transit or any sort of transit modes is always going to be linked to planning, no question. We're in Brampton that there's been some political decisions that have been made by our council in the last couple of years with respect to light rail. You're not in the political field, so I'm not going to ask you to comment on that kind of mindset. But looking forward, what do you think is sort of the next phase in terms of transit in this city? That is it just going to be? Is it going to be more LRT? Is it going to be something else? We're at an age now where we have the sharing economy, Uber, and ride sharing, those sort of things. Are those viable sort of transit options besides the automobile?
I don't know if you know, but I'm on the transit agency, or the transportation agency in Vancouver is one of my other tasks. And what we're beginning to understand is that public movement is going to start to embrace all kinds of modes. It's just not going to be rapid transit and trams and buses. It's going to be, maybe we'll have an Uber-like thing that gets you to the public transit. Maybe we'll even have other kinds of devices that will allow you to go on rights of way that are not available to cars. That kind of thing we're all starting to look at, those of us who are trying to think more in the future. But in the future, ultimately, it won't be about transit. In the future, there's only one thing that I have found anywhere in the world that actually works, and that's called proximity. You just get origins and destinations closer together so that you have shorter trips and fewer trips, and the trips you do have are more likely naturally to occur in what we often call the active modes. And that, I think, is where the best transportation plan is not a transportation plan at all with applying more technology. It's a land use plan, and finding ways to pull those origins and destinations together in a better way. And that is a challenge that is being taken up all over the world, and fascinating things are resulting as because of that.
Okay, I'd like to ask about the university. Given the location decision of the university led by Ryerson, is being led by Ryerson through a provincial process, will the process you're developing for feedback look to see how the location can be leveraged? So will it factor in at all to what you're doing?
I'm going to say yes and no, and I know that sounds like, why should I say that? It's such an easy answer. I'm going to say yes, because we're going to be inquiring about anything the public wants to talk about. I'm also going to say yes, because there's no doubt that a university is a synergistic thing, and that any smart city is going to want to try to put together all the other components that would help to leverage the best of that. I'm going to say no, though, in terms of I'm not going out to ask people that question. When I go out, when we, I shouldn't say just I, but all the staff, and there will be many, many staff over the next few months out talking to the people of Brampton, we're not talking about one thing, transit or the university or anything. We're saying to them, what matters to you? What do you want to talk about? You know, they have the 5 game changers here in the city. It's very unusual to see a city that's got it down to 5 game changers. They're pursuing those. I have no question that they will pursue those to the nth degree. What I want to know is, what do the people out there think will make a great city? Is it those 5 things? And if it is, we'll talk a lot about them. Or is it something completely different? I know some different things that I think they will want to talk about from my work elsewhere. We'll see.
Thank you.
So we kind of have this situation where you're going to be engaging the public, and you'll be engaging people who currently live here, who own houses, but you'll probably also be engaging millennials, and they tend to be, they like transit, most of them, they like walkability, they like bikeability, and all those things. So how do you marry what millennials want and that city that they're going to grow into in the future and hopefully be able to afford a house in, to what people who currently own houses and live here want?
I think by asking the question of what do you want the city to look like in 5, 10, and 15 years, we're talking about that evolution over time. You're right, and some people around here that have been here for a long time, and I had the luxury of growing up here as well too, and through the generations, I think when you realize that, say your children, for instance, and I think you touched on this earlier, they don't have an opportunity to stay in the neighborhood they grew up in because that mix of housing is not there. So I think it's getting both perspectives, and this isn't a scientific exercise. It's not a statistically correct survey by any means, but it's really a barometer to gauge what we're hearing out of the community and figure out what direction to go in next, and that'll help us set the policy. So it's not, this exercise isn't going to result in a checklist by any means, but it's a direction setting course. And then as we develop those unique policies on all of the different issues, that will involve reaching out to the public again as well.
I would even add to that the thing I love about my job is about cities. And cities are like big, complicated places. They're not made for one group of people or another. They are made for all kinds of people. And there's places for this group and places for this group. And the beauty is that they both have those places and they come into contact with one another and things change. We definitely are going to be talking to millennials. There's a target to try to reach the younger group, so because we know they're going to be here in the future. In the same way that we do want to talk to the people who've been here a long time. They've invested their time, their energy, their money, their lives, their families into this. We also want to talk to people who may not be millennials, but they're new arrivals. And we want to talk to them. And we know that they're a huge group in this community, and we also want to get those ideas. The beauty is, I've never worked in a city, ever, that you can't fit it all in. There are some times where you have a battleground over landscape, but more often it's things that have just been left out of the equation, and the equation is so rich in complexity that you can add it in. And I think that's what we'll do. And we want to make a city that draws those millennials. We do, because, well, for one thing, they are the future. But we also want to make a city that continues to be useful and fulfilling for the people who've put their hat in the ring here 25 years ago. So it has to work for both in a way.
Thank you.
Next question.
I think I'd like to sort of put it from the perspective of people who are not millennials. And it's kind of surprising that I would ask this kind of question, but there are people that hear that you mentioned NIMBYism, and that may be a accurate term to describe some people, but I think the vast majority of people who live in Brampton for many decades are, just hesitant to change overall. It doesn't matter what type of change it is, especially, for example, maybe small businesses who are, taking a look at this sort of plan about how to build a future Brampton, and they worry about how's this going to affect my bottom line, how's this going to affect my business, my livelihood. So you're the one who works in the city, so I'm just wondering, what is the communications aspect, or what do you say to those people who may feel that way?
Well, I think I have to hear from them first to really understand what their concerns are. In fact, small business, the few that I've spoken with are kind of excited about this new tract and new opportunities. And I think that's the one good thing that we're talking about with the university, is that it's not just a university of bricks and mortar. It's about business incubation and allowing people to be educated and foster their business ideas and grow businesses right here in the city. So I think from a business perspective, there's a very bright future here for the city, and I actually haven't heard otherwise. So if I do, I'd be interested to hear that. I
want to just say, though, there's one word in the English language that was made up during my generation that's hideous, and that word is NIMBYism, because it's a pejorative, it's negative, it immediately marginalizes people. We have to embrace people who love their communities and care about their communities. Yeah, they're maybe conservative in change. Well, our job is to show when change helps them. I think that is a challenge to us, because otherwise we're not being respectful. So I will never be using that word in my work. I will be saying, if you are worried about your community, come talk to me. Because I'm worried about your community too. Just as I'm excited when someone else comes and talks to me and says, I'm so damn excited, I'm so excited, excuse my language, I'm so excited that, I've just arrived here and it's something I've never had. I'm interested in talking to them. But we can't, even before we have the conversation, marginalize people.
But inevitably, that happens. So, my question is, how will your process achieve consensus?
I will tell you what I found. First is you don't stop at positions. You don't talk in positions. So when someone says, I hate this, you don't write, I hate this. You say, why do you hate that? You try to get behind and look at people's interests. And there's something we've discovered about interacting with hundreds, if not thousands of people, is that when you break down their positions into the interest behind it, you often find very rich fodder for common ground. Sometimes you don't. And so often, while we are searching for consensus, we're searching for what I might call the direction of the majority of the community. You also, sometimes you make choices, and even sometimes you tolerate contradiction, right? Would you like to live in a city that did not have contradiction? I wouldn't. I wouldn't want to be there. So we're searching for all of that, and how you put it together. The key is, how do you put it together into a success that actually works for more people and makes the place a better place, not only to its own people and place, but to the world outside. I don't want to be in a perfect place. I think that would be a bore.
Right.
So I think that concludes the end of our session. Again, I encourage everybody to come to our website and share your bright ideas about Brampton's future at www.brampton.ca/future-ready. And we look forward to hearing from everyone.
Guys, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.